So Makasa Looking Horse is Mohawk with Clan and Lakota. She is a McMaster University Indigenous Studies student residing in 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. So without further ado, we'll get started with our workshop here, which we somewhat set up as a bit of a question and answer, but I think just to set the stage, Makasa has some background she'd like to provide, and that kind of leads us into our first question, which is, can you tell us about your journey fighting against Blue Triton, formerly known as Nestle, and just kind of walk us through that journey to set the stage of what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, well, it was just a really long journey to be exact. Like it was, it started when I started working on a Haudenosaunee water research project, and I'll go into a little bit more within the slides, but I learned that our reserve was having lack of, had issues with their water, that we are in a water crisis, which growing up, I really wasn't aware of, and I really didn't think of my reserve being in a water crisis. And so when I found that out, it was immediately shocking to us. And it was shocking to us all, even the research team, because we tested for heavy metals that wasn't, that our community leadership wanted us to test for. So Hannah actually was part of that, and she was testing the different heavy metals, and that's how we know each other, is that we worked together on that. And so, yeah, they found out through the tap water that that we have 5 different heavy metals and really high levels of E. coli. And so that research is still going on. And a lot of our residents in 6 nations don't even have any kind of running water. No running water within the household. And to think that we're right by Toronto and we're right by Hamilton and Guelph and all of these huge cities, yet 6 Nations community members don't have any running water within their household. And this isn't just something that 6 Nations has. It's communities across Canada have this water crisis and this water issue. And so it's really devastating. And when I found that out, I also found out what Nestle was doing, in which they were taking 3.6 million liters per day out of our aquifer water. And so nobody knew this in my community. And that's what led me to do this kind of water work that kind of got recognized. But I think that I wanted to go forward on the next slide here. So I want to say like it's bad. And so the Indigenous leadership in climate change noted by United Nations studies, local advocates need to hear their words. So summary of climate change: deforestation, pollution, development, loss of diversity are serious threats to Indigenous people due to their dependence on the environment and the resources of the lands and territories. It causes the loss of traditional knowledge, disintegrating, I don't know the words, but traditional governance structures and their culture. This policy briefing provides examples of holistic perspectives of Indigenous people on resources governance, land rights, mitigation of climate change, impact on the environment, and resilience building using the traditional knowledge. And it also highlights the benefit of Indigenous people's full participation, Indigenous women in decision-making process to prevent conflict. It notes that the importance of upholding the Indigenous rights of peoples is enshrined in international law, and full respect for the right of Indigenous people decision to not engage in the global economy. Further, it points at the needs to promote dialogue amongst Indigenous people, local community scientists, includes climate change expertise, policymakers, and relevant actors to enable co-production of knowledge and sharing sustainable strategies to overcome risks and strengthen resilience to climate change. So climate change, so Indigenous people needs to be ahead of climate change because we have been fighting for since forever, since colonialism. We've been fighting for our lands, and we've been fighting for our waters, and that's basically fighting for the land to stay how it is, and for people not to develop on it, for the land to stay how it is in nature, in the circle of life, and be healthy and do its job, which is create oxygen for us and takes care of the whole system takes care of itself. And so we need to leave it be. And so with the cease and desist, doing my journey, like I was saying before, we got the cease. During the journey, I had to go to my traditional leadership, and I had to let them know, not only like that, that our waters and our tap water had heavy metals in it and a bunch of E. coli that Canada has never tested for before. And I had to let them know that, and that Nestle was taking 3.6 million liters of aquifer water. And so I had to inform them all of this bad news, but they were just as enraged as I was that this was actually happening. So at first I had to inform them, and so they said, well, give them a cease and desist since they're taking water out of our aquifer. And so me and Bev Jacobs drafted this letter on the right. And this one is actually support letter, but we actually have another cease and desist letter. And so that one was to Nestle. And so the picture that you see here is me in the middle, and beside me is two clan mothers, which is our women leaders in our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and they hold a huge title and a huge saying of and power in what they say. And so having two of them beside me and delivering the cease and desist to Nestle was huge. And they should respect these traditional leaders just as much as they respect Trudeau. That's how much or more. They should have more respect than Trudeau, actually. So, but obviously we're not heard. They left, but then they sold to Blue Triton. So Blue Triton has moved into the water bottling plant that was taking up the space that Nestle was. So they just switched names basically, but Blue Triton is actually now selling water stocks on Wall Street, which is a bit worse. And they're selling stocks until there's no water left, essentially. And so this is not their water to take, and our leadership has given them a cease and desist, which we actually just delivered a few weeks ago. And so we delivered the cease and desist that's on your left, here, and it essentially says the same thing that the first cease and desist said. And so that's where we're standing now. And we told them that we're not going to come back. And if we do come back, then there's going to be even more, like what's happening at Land Back. There's going to be more of a resistance. So we're protesting because obviously our words aren't being heard whatsoever. And it's really maddening. And this shouldn't only enrage like Indigenous people of Six Nations, but all of Canada. So to emphasize on the Six Nations struggles to access of clean drinking water, it is estimated that only 10% of our Six Nations population has water piped into their households from the water treatment plant. So less than 30% of the population has access to this particular water, which is from the water treatment plant, through their work or by attending school. So so our homes really have to rely on the private accesses to water. So like for an example, you have to pay someone who has a truck and who has a water tank on their truck to go get you water. You have to go pay for that water and then pay for them to bring it to your house and put it into your cistern. So that's what majority of our people at Six Nations have to do. And sometimes it can be up to 180 per week or 180 bi-weekly. It just really depends how much you're using the water. And our households on reserve have huge families, and so we use more water, and so we have to pay for more water. So as a result, some homeowners receive trucked in water or travel to a local water station to fill up a large container, while others are forced to incur the financial and environmental burden and inconvenience of routinely purchasing bottled water. So we go without clean drinking water, and then we have to turn to bottled water, which is most likely from Nestle. And so we're purchasing our water that should be free to us. And this huge corporation like Blue Triton and Nestle are removing this water for permits that the federal government gives them for $500 a year. And so they're only paying $500 a year, and then they're making millions and millions off of it for however many years, and we don't know how much water is actually left in that watershed, in the aquifer. So a pilot survey results show that water insecurity experienced by Six Nations people is gendered ways, with Haudenosaunee women carrying more concern and anxiety about our water and access quality. These concerns encompass more stressors for women and their children: anger, frustration, worries, as much as it does logical household issues such as interruptions to water access or concerns about accessing water to wash hands during the pandemic. Though Negino's findings are extremely troubling, the women are affected the most. Nestle, Blue Triton, profiting off of our treaty lands and waters, while we suffer, should enrage Canadians who speak of reconciliation, build water pipelines to the homes of First Nations and not oil pipelines. The federal government spends billions on now defunct pipelines. Where's the outrage over tax dollars? And so there is lots of studies, and we talked to lots of families in Six Nations, and these were the findings. And it's really, really hard. Like if you're living in a household that does not have any access to clean drinking water, if you don't have the money to build infrastructure for the clean drinking water to be piped into your household, because we have to pay for everything. We have to pay for the culverts. You have to pay for the power lines to your house. You have to pay for all of the water piping. So a lot of people can't afford, because once you're already can't afford the piping in the household, because once you're already building the infrastructure, you're already like $40,000 in the hole, and your house isn't even up yet. So those are the things that a lot of people don't even think about, and that's including with water, that people can't afford the infrastructure, and that shouldn't really be our cost. It should not be our cost at all to have to pay for the water infrastructure. And so a lot of people and a lot of households go without clean drinking water. So United Nations invited to, I was invited to the Youth Climate Change Summit and to do the opening, and I was able to raise awareness on Nestle illegally taking our water from Haudenosaunee waters and lands. And so I was super grateful, but to do this, but at that gathering, I also noticed that there was no other Indigenous people there, and I was mainly tokenized. I was tokenized, and I knew that, to do this beautiful blessing and opening for the Youth Climate Change Summit and I wasn't allowed. Well, I wasn't supposed to like say anything political, or I wasn't supposed to have a voice. Basically, I was just supposed to be a really nice prop opening. But they had no leaderships at that table in that space, and they had no other Indigenous people there. So that really told me on a global, international scale that Indigenous peoples really aren't at the table like I thought, that I hoped for, and I thought that they might be, since I was the only one there. But here I was able to raise awareness on Nestle. So the natural world is declining at a faster rate than any time in human history, according to the United Nations report 2018. Humans depend on natural resources to survive. So this accelerating and unparalleled loss of biodiversity poses a direct threat to people living in all regions of the world. So it's not just Indigenous problem that development is happening, but it's everybody's problem. And when Indigenous people manage to remain in control over bodies, culture, and land, they thrive. The United Nations report concluded, while humans have significantly altered environments, these trends have been less severe or avoided altogether in areas held or managed by Indigenous peoples. Indigenous people could contribute to global sustainability efforts if provided legal and political rights to use and steward the lands they know so well. So if we were just in charge of our own lands, we could, the biodiversity would be much healthier. So another thing that people don't often think about is the connection between environment and violence against Indigenous women. In the 2015 report of Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples focused on violence against Indigenous women, the Special Rapporteur noted the following: epidemic violations of collective. I'm almost done here. Okay, yeah. Social and cultural rights can be seen as constituting a form of structural violence against Indigenous women and girls. Structural violence results in women being victimized by the realities of the circumstances of their everyday life and routinely excluded from the rights and resources otherwise guaranteed to citizens. Structural violence is interlinked and mutually enforced with other forms of violence. So it's connected. I think it's really hard to explain, and I know that I'm almost up here, so I might just
about
over.
10 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Okay. So we know that there's like a huge there's a huge link that's not always interconnected or related, but I know that we touch on it a lot within our show on Oneganos Let's Talk Water, and it's the women, and you can find that on YouTube, and it's the women, it's called Women and Water, and the one with Beverly Jacobs, she really connects how our environment is mistreated just like Indigenous women, that the land is completely destroyed and disregarded, and that's a huge connection with our Murder Missing Indigenous Women movement. And it's because they don't have respect for either, and that both are life givers and have a huge value and a huge part of Indigenous ways of life. Our land and our women are one and the same thing, and and are huge and are detrimental to our cultures. And so by colonialism taking away both of our lands, our waters, and our women, they are continuing the form of genocide. And so another person that really talks great on this is Karen Stout, and she talks about how about genocide and how it's still going on in different forms. And so when people think about like Indigenous and think about genocide, we can think about the Holocaust, but it also applies to Indigenous peoples. But it's harder to see and harder to explain because it didn't just happen in one area. It happened within hundreds of years. It happened with the smallpox. It happens with the illnesses. It happened with taking away our land and putting us on reserves. And it happened within residential schools. And at residential schools, the residential schools had huge graveyards, and the number is at around 1,500 now of unmarked graves that they found of Indigenous children's bodies. And that's huge. And they just found one here in Six Nations at the Mush Hole. So there's different forms, and then sterilization of Indigenous women, and then the murdered and missing Indigenous women, and then also children in CES and foster care. So it's taking away our children and our land and our waters, and it all encapsulates, and it's all interconnected. It's really hard to explain, I guess, because it's so intense. But I know that we have a lot of content on talking about these things on Oneganos Let's Talk Water. And we have like 27 episodes and 4 seasons, and they're all about water, but how water is interconnected to different things, like I've just shared a little bit on. And so we have professional and scientists, knowledge keepers, and people from Alaska, like Quanah Chasing Horse, and people from South Dakota, people from New Zealand, and people from New Mexico, all over the world, and talking about and sharing with each other their different struggles and the different ways that they can cope. So not cope, but the different work that they're doing and how they're being resilient, really, and making a better future for future generations. And so I think this is where you can really help is that right now, like all of the things I just explained, that we are actually looking to expand, and we're looking to find monies and funds, and looking to find a place that we can have weekly shows of Oneganos Let's Talk Water. Because right now I'm just in my mom's room. I mean, not my mom's room, but my mom's house in my old bedroom. And she really wants it back. So we're actually looking for somewhere to be. But like this whole Oneganos Let's Talk Water started in my living room. And then we migrated to my old room. And so we're really looking for somewhere to continue this show and continue to spread awareness, because it's really needed, and there's really nothing like it on YouTube or on Facebook or anywhere accessible. So that's what we're working towards right now. So if there's any kind of questions, I can probably take one.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to drop any questions you may have in the chat box. Thank you so much for kind of giving us some background, Makasha, on where the fight against blue triton comes from, formerly known as Nestle, which you very neededly pointed out that their name has changed, but let's not forget that that falls under Nestle. And I think something that me and you discussed in prepping for this workshop was Halloween's coming up, the holidays are coming up, so Nestle's a big name for those, as well as costumes and just kind of the climate of this year. Allies are looking to do better, be better. So do you have any kind of recommendations or?
Yeah, that's so great that you mentioned that. But yeah, I have done a campaign a while back, and it was about we are not a costume. And so I know that Halloween is going to be coming up, and something that you can do like right now or within the next week or two to make sure or take the costumes off of the racks that say and sexualize Indigenous women or just blatantly mocking our culture. My dad, he's in that picture. He's a chief, so it's really, really awful to see people wearing headdresses and mocking our culture, and that these costumes are still allowed to be in stores today. Like this should not even be a thing in today's world. Like to have squaw costumes hanging up and to have tomahawks and all of these mockeries of Indigenous culture. It's really, really maddening, and I'm really surprised that people haven't taken this serious and gotten like Party City and Halloween stores to take off all of the costumes off the racks so that they don't so that these costumes don't exist anymore. And profit off it.
And then same with your candy sales, think about what you're doing, where you're purchasing from, and what those bigger corporations are supporting. As an ally, as Makasha was talking about, I work on this podcast with her. We started it together, and just in terms of water scarcity and disparity between the two places, it's really infuriating to drive 25 minutes from my apartment here in downtown Hamilton to your house, which is almost like really close to the boundary of the reserve, and already there's such a difference in access to water. You have to think about things differently. It's just infuriating, and also then to study the water quality differences is just incredibly unfair. And like you said, the UN has put those messages out there, but having you there's still, the systems aren't perfect, and people like you bringing awareness to stuff like this is really important. We look to you as Indigenous youth leader, and someone you mentioned on a chasing horse, right? She's doing really big things. She was at the Met Gala recently. So, I mean, like Makasha mentioned, a lot of this seems maybe not immediately connected, but if you want to go back and listen to everything she said, there's this tale to be weaved through absolutely everything, and it is all interconnected as water is, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think we do a good job within our show, and all of the seasons are so amazing, and all of the episodes and all of the people on there. It's just a great resource of educational and information. So if you want to go check that out, it's Oneganos Let's Talk Water. You can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all of our videos are recorded and posted onto YouTube. So awesome. Go check it out.
I don't see any questions here. We can wrap it up if you want to say some last words here, Makasha.
I think that's mainly it. Just if you want to do something actionable, like right now, you can go to any of the stores and rip off all of those. I've taken all of those like costumes and taken them up to the front and asked them if they can be removed, because my culture isn't a costume. So like I've tried to do that, and I've like raised hell at the cashiers and told them to remove everything. And like you said, if remember not to buy any Nestle candy, and to be just conscious of where all the candy's coming from, because that's what a lot of people use for Halloween.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Makasha. I think it makes a really big difference to hear directly from you. And it's just incredibly unfortunate and unfair and unacceptable that you described all those conditions that your reserve is under, and for Nestle's profit. Let's not forget that they were Nestle. So thank you for all the work you do fighting against the Triton. And you can check out any of that on either Makasha's socials, Anegnos, or the Water Watcher socials of the climate strike that they did recently as well with the cease and desist order. So thank you so much for all the work you do.
Thank you, and thank you guys for watching my workshop. I really appreciate it. And I love all the comments and reading all of them. And I hope to see you again maybe next year. I don't know what's going to happen. Or even on the show. You can comment on there.